I'm not the greatest photographer in the world, but I've taken a lot of photographs of our garden and on garden tours and various other gardens. And I have a few hints that might help you improve your photographs. First of all, let's talk about what you might take your photographs with. In my case, I use my cell phone most of the time. 95 to 100% of the time I use the cell phone because it's always in my pocket. It's always ready. And the modern cell phones now have incredible power and can take a picture that is excellent quality. It used to be that we used a point-and-shoot camera, and these were small enough to carry around and would be able to take quick shots. But the cell phone can do just about anything that little camera could do, so they've more or less been replaced. I also have a larger camera, and it allows me to do some specialized things like switching lenses out, and you'll notice that it has a flip back that allows me to see what's going on in the camera, even if I lower it right down to the ground. Now let's talk about composition, which is the most important thing when you're taking photographs of the garden. We'll talk a little bit about the technical things a bit later, but let's look at what you're trying to convey with your photograph. Here's one example of a photograph. I hope you think that this is a good photograph, and let's examine why that would be. I have in the bottom left corner, I've taken all the color out, and you can see that it's still a strong photograph, even with no color. So if you can get an image that works in black and white, it will probably also work with the color. Think of the color as an added bonus. Now, this photograph has a strong focal point, which I hope you agree is the chairs, and it has lines leading your eye towards that focal point. The path does that, and the border does that. Everything focuses towards the center focal point. It also has, it's very simple, has very few colors and no distracting detail, and nothing in the image tends to pull your eye out of the frame, especially out the corners. So this is an excellent photograph and a good example of how you can create a photograph as long as you keep it simple. Concentrate on the focal point, and don't put any distracting details in it. You can use other things like repetition to draw your eye towards the focal point. You can have a winding path that goes towards the door of this house in the corner. Is it exactly where you would want the focal point to be? And don't forget that you can use foliage. Foliage, as long as it is a strong contrast, you can easily use the various colors of green to create a interesting image. Now, when you go to a garden, first thing you want to do is calm down, slow down, think about what you're going to take a picture of. It happens so often that people will go on a garden tour and visit a garden, take a lot of photographs, and when they get home, none of them are of any use. So it's better to have a few good pictures as opposed to a lot of bad pictures. So one of the first things you have to decide is what are you taking a picture of? Are you taking a picture of the garden, or are you taking a picture of the individual plants? So that'll help you focus on what you're trying to do. Now, here's this garden we visited was really awful. It was full of weeds, and it was poorly designed, and we couldn't understand why it was on the garden tour. I found this sweet pea growing on the fence, and I decided to take a picture of that, and it turned out pretty well. But it could be better because this photograph is the sweet pea's dead center, like a bullseye, and it makes it sort of uninteresting. If you recrop it like this, you can see that and put the focal point of the image off center. It's a more interesting photograph. Some people actually divide the image up into 9 rectangles, and then they place their focal point and the things of interest on the places where the lines cross. I don't use that much, but it's a good way of making sure that you don't put the focal point dead center. Also, it's useful to have to look at contrasting colors. In the color wheel, yellow is opposite purple. So if you put yellow and purple together, you'll find that the yellow makes the purple pop and the purple makes the yellow pop. Also, the Christmas colors of red and green basically do the same kind of thing. Now let's talk a bit about the technical stuff. The camera has 3 ways of adjusting the light that comes to the sensor. First of all, the aperture, or the hole, size of the hole that the light comes through. And second, the shutter speed, in which the amount of time the shutter is open. And the third is the sensitivity of the sensor, or sensitivity of the film, or ISO. So let's talk about each of these in turn. First of all, aperture. The aperture can vary from very large to very small, and you need a large opening when it's a dull day, or you have to let more light into the sensor. And if it's a bright day, you can close it right down to a small pinhole. There is something that changes with respect to the size of the opening, and that is the depth of field. If you look at the image on the bottom of the fence, part of it is out of focus, and that's because it has a shallow depth of field caused by having a large opening. So the large aperture will cause a shallow depth of field, and consequently, and subsequently, the small opening, if you have enough light for that, will increase your depth of field. So you can see the photograph at the top. The fence is all in focus. So aperture affects depth of field, and you may want to use that feature in order to fuzz out a background or do various artistic things. So keep that in mind. The second thing that affects the amount of light getting to the sensor is the shutter speed. So the amount of time that the shutter is open for. And this can vary from very, very long times down to very small times. 1/130th of a second is about the limit to which somebody can hold the camera still and still get a decent shot if you have a decent amount of light. And often people will increase the shutter speed to 1/25th of a second, which stops most things. And if you want to really be sure, 1/250th of a second. Now, there are two things that might affect the need for changing the shutter speed. First of all, the movement of the camera itself. So if you're wandering through a garden and click, 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 and moving your camera, then that will affect the image that you get. So it's really important to keep the camera as still as absolutely possible. In fact, sometimes you can use a tripod to do that and trigger it remotely, and that will get rid of that problem. The other issue is the subject might be moving. For example, if the wind is blowing the plants, you might need a quicker shutter speed in order to stop their motion. As long as you have enough light to do that, that's a good thing. Now, the third way of increasing the light or decreasing the light in the sensor is the sensitivity of the sensor itself. We used to be able to buy film that was 100 ASA, which was pretty good for bright light conditions, and you could get a decent shot that way. But if you were forced to take photographs in a fairly dark area, or you needed to take pictures with something that was moving, like sports, you had to jump up your ASA to, say, 800, and the downside to that was that the higher ASA, or the more sensitive films, were grainy and noisy, and so the picture was not as crisp as it would be with a more sensitive film, or less sensitive film. The sensor is the same. You still get this problem of noise in the sensor if you have to increase the sensitivity. Some cases you don't have a choice. Say you're in an aquarium, and it's dark, and the fish are moving, and you want to take a picture, and the only choice you have is to increase the sensitivity of the film. Lucky for you, most cameras are kind of automatic in that way, and then you can set them so that this is compensated. Now, most cameras will have a wheel on them for setting the camera as functions. For the most part, if you're unsure what to do with this, then I would just put it on auto, because the modern cameras are pretty good about figuring out what the scene needs, and will give you a pretty decent shot even on an auto setting. But there are a number of other settings as well. You can there's P, which I often use mostly for stopping the flash, so that I'm not that fond of a flash with pictures because it makes it kind of harsh, and so I use P for that. The S stands for shutter priority, so at the expense of aperture, it will set the shutter, and vice versa. A stands for aperture priority, and it'll set the aperture first and at the expense of the shutter speed. And M is full manual. You can just set everything you want. There are a number of other settings that you might find on the dial. You'll find a running person that might indicate it's good for sports. You'll find a picture of a mountain that is good for landscape, a picture of a flower that's good for pictures of flowers, and a picture of a person that will be useful for portraits. So these all have their settings appropriate for that style of photography, and it's worth checking them out. I don't use them very much, but it's worth checking them out and seeing what they will do for you. Now, I said I didn't like flash photography, but there's a few cases where you really need it. For example, here's a backlit subject which is totally lost unless you put the flash on. And when you put the flash on, it lights up the subject, and you can still see the background as well. So sometimes you need a flash. And here is a situation where we were when we were in Cuba. The fellow was trying to show us how small orchid seeds were, so that they transported in the wind. And I used the flash to stop the action so you could see the seeds. They're very tiny, but you can still see them in the image. Now, the worst time to take a photograph is at high noon, because the light things are totally washed out, just white, and the dark things are dark without much definition. So it's best to avoid bright sunlight if you can. You can find some shade where there is a flower to take a picture of, or you can stand in front of it yourself or get somebody else to. Or maybe you can use one of these flippy things that just make sure you don't hit yourself in the face with it. But the best thing to do is to take your photographs early in the morning or late in the afternoon, and the light then is warm and wonderful, and if you can at all take pictures early or late, you'll get much better photographs. So to take better pictures, you need to simplify. You need to put the camera on auto if you're not sure how to set it, and avoid the direct sun. Hold the camera still and make sure you don't have moving objects in the scene, and you will have fairly decent photographs next time you go out.